Okay, so let's get started. I have the honor to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Kara Boyles. Kara became the City of South Bend's first female city engineer in January of 2017. She is a registered professional engineer in Indiana and teaches a community-based project leadership course as an adjunct professor in Notre Dame's College of Engineering. Among her many professional and service affiliations, Kara is a founding member of the local Women in STEM Network and a member and past branch president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. She earned a Ph.D. in civil and environmental engineering at Notre Dame after completing both her bachelor's and master of science in civil engineering from Bradley University in Illinois. She also received the 2020 Athena Award from the South Bend Regional Chamber of Commerce for her career success, community service, and for actively assisting women in their achievement of professional excellence and leadership skills. She's a wife, mother, and fitness instructor, and is currently pursuing a Master of Business Administration at Indiana University South Bend. We are excited to have her with us here today to share her insights on leading by example. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kara Boyles, maybe with a wave since we're...
Yes, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kara, for coming today. We'd like to start, if you would please tell us about your path to becoming the first woman to serve as South Bend city engineer.
Great. So yes, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to speak with you all today. I'll also say Happy Veterans Day, as it is Veterans Day. And so I am at home and the day off, and wasn't minding my schedule and recognizing that today was a holiday for myself. But I'm super happy to be here. This really was a great opportunity for me, as hard as it was, to self-reflect, right? To really think about my leadership style. Sometimes we're just going about our lives and stopping and reflecting. As you know, I'm an engineer, so that isn't necessarily fortes. And it really did give me an opportunity to have that, get some insight into what was important to me. So I really appreciate that. I'll kind of highlight some of the things that you mentioned, Elisa, but try not to duplicate too much. But I was born in Central Illinois, and I was born to my parents, Karen and Jerry. I always like to start sort of my story there because they were 16 and 18 years old, respectively. And they were both from Catholic families, so they got married. My mom finished high school then with a 2-year-old, and that was around 1975. So they divorced soon after that. And I saw my dad, in typical fashion at those times for about 5 hours every Sunday for the remainder of my childhood. And I lived with my mom. So things a little different then. That's kind of the nature of my story, right? Things are different today, thankfully. On the very day I was born, it was interesting because my dad was actually hired. He was 18 years old and he was hired at Caterpillar, which is headquartered in my hometown. And I say all this because I really believe he began planting those engineering seeds right there from that very moment. He took me to every family day they had back then. And back then you could ride the big dozers on their proving grounds. I don't think you can probably do that today. But at the time I had no idea. I could have never guessed that I'd ever be associated with the heavy equipment like that. But as I was in high school, like many of my female colleagues, I was good in math and science. So majoring in engineering sounded logical. It sounded very practical. I knew it would offer me a stable, well-paying professional job one day. But that means I was technically a first-generation college graduate. However, in 2014, my dad did go back to school and he got an industrial engineering degree. And then a year later, he retired because at that point, he'd spent 40 years in the industry. So I love that part. As an undergrad, I began by majoring in physics and then transitioned to engineering. I was fortunate in that period to spend a summer interning for the Illinois Department of Transportation. And again, I like to tell this story because I say fortunate because it was only because my best friend's dad just happened to be best friends with a local politician. And he later became a Secretary of Transportation at one time. And I don't really know what he did, if he made a call or what happened, but I did get a job offer that summer. I happened to be the only girl working in the department, and I was one of very few actual engineering majors, because again, that's how things kind of worked back then. And they did keep me inside all summer working on soil analyses. But I did have a wonderful leader. And actually, it was funny, I just found the other day that I still have the form evaluation he gave me that summer in a drawer. But I did learn at this time really that I could make a difference in people's lives as a civil engineer, because until that time, I really didn't even know what it meant to be an engineer. And it was the first time I could really see how engineering really affected people's lives in many ways that we take for granted. So like Elisa mentioned, I got a bachelor's and a master's, and then I made my way to Notre Dame in 1997 to attend Notre Dame, and had a few detours along the way, but graduated in 2006 with my PhD. And at the time I graduated with 2 little girls in tow. So, I like to tell this story because this really gets there about, it was really partway through my PhD, after my first baby, that I was working for a local consulting firm, my first job. And on one particular day, I was invited to lunch by one of the owners with the then South Bend city engineer. And we went to a restaurant called the Volcano, if you've ever been to Volcano, out on the west side across from the airport, because it was apparently his favorite place. And again, this was back when engineering consultants would take their clients, which are mostly municipal employees, to lunches and dinners and to golfing and to, fancy outings. And again, a disclaimer that I don't do that today. I don't do that for a multitude of reasons that I don't have time to go into. But what I found was that he was so highly regarded by the owner of my firm. I found it incredibly inspiring how connected he was to South Bend. Our conversation drifted from one topic to the next, and he was extremely well versed. No question stumped him. And I knew that very day that I wanted his job. I wanted to be the South Bend city engineer. I was again in the midst of my graduate school, but it was interesting to know and think about the fact that actually one day he actually worked for me as a part-time engineer. So kind of fun. It is hard to believe, as I look back now, that when I did finally join the city's Department of Public Works in South Bend, I was in fact the very first woman engineer, period, that had been hired in the Public Works Department. So I spent 2 years at first serving as the Deputy Director of Public Works, before taking what I will call a sabbatical to focus at the time on one of my other passions that Elisa mentioned, which was fitness. So for the past almost 30 years, I've been a group fitness instructor. I've taught everything from, I used to teach step in the rock years ago when I was a graduate student. I taught kickboxing, spinning. Now I like to do a little more gentler yoga practice. But I still do strength train. That's one of my favorite things to do, and we can always talk about that later if you'd like, because it's one of the most important things we can do for ourselves as women. All the while I spent that year, I did almost 500 hours of yoga training, thinking that I was going to open my own yoga studio, only to be reminded, very similar to when I got my PhD, that when you learn a lot about a subject, you really learn just how much you don't know. And I was in no way prepared to run a yoga studio, nor was I prepared to really hold the space that is required as a yoga teacher for your students. So I also left my job in 2016, to be honest, though, because I had really lost my passion for the work. What I was doing really wasn't engineering as Deputy Director of Public Works. I had gotten very burned out. We were in the midst of a shifting administration from our former mayor to Mayor Pete, and there were some shakedowns happening. I was uncovering past indiscretions. I was firing people in my new role. I was firing men who were my father's age, who had been with the city for their entire career, and it was heavy. Meanwhile, I had a 15-year-old, a nine-year-old, and I was actually still working on really blending families with my now husband. And you probably agree that yoga sounded pretty good at that point. But I was again, I always like to point out, it was a privileged situation I was in at the time. I was able to take that moment to pause my career and step back for a moment. But I did return to South Bend in 2016. Later that year, I returned at the bequest of my boss, the director of public works. They needed someone to step in to be interim city engineer. And I had really no intention of staying at that time, but it had drawn me back, and I had found that this was the place I wanted to be. And I think that was a good moment of really understanding that sometimes you have passions for things that are the things you love to do, but they may not be your life's calling. And what I came to realize at that moment, that there was a reason I needed to be in this role. And for many reasons, because I am also passionate about women in STEM, and I am passionate about creating more women leaders. And I knew that by stepping back into that role, I could help move that forward. So that's sort of a highlight, longer probably answer than you expected. But there are lots of stories. As I was thinking through the answer to this question, I started thinking about, suffering from imposter syndrome, sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, all part of my story as well. So I know we're going to break out, so we'll have lots of time to talk about more other details. But my path has taught me so much, and today, I'm thankful to embrace the detours, sometimes the wrong turns, but I like to say that, I like to bring that to the forefront, because it all of our paths are different, and they are going to not necessarily be straight lines, but we can still continue to propel forward.
Thank you, Kara, for sharing. And I know you do have so much more that you could share. And I really the word resilience just comes to mind hearing you speak. And I'm grateful that you stuck with it and you're in the role that you're in now, being now in this leadership role. Can you share a few key principles that you follow as a leader?
Sure. I think that my leadership principles, they really flow out of understanding and knowing my core values. So if you haven't, I'm guessing this group has probably done some work internally on understanding your core values. But I think knowing those can help lead us. The first one is to be authentic. And when I give advice to myself later on, you'll hear I'll say to be authentic. It's a process always. And I try to model this with my employees too, to bring your whole self to work. Studies have shown that feeling authentic at work has been linked to higher engagement, higher workplace satisfaction, better performance, and just better overall well-being. And this is a pretty widely accepted, acknowledged trait for leaders, but of course it can be trickier for women. And there's no doubt, if you have power, as I would say I do in my role, it is easier to be more authentic at work. Example of, just in general, like how things were 20 years ago, there were dress codes for engineers, and most men were wearing khakis and blue shirts then, and they're still wearing khakis and blue shirts today. But if you walk around my office on any given day, I might have on ripped jeans or leggings. Don't get me started about COVID. I had a bun on top of my head and a sweatshirt hoodie on every day. That was the life. That's where we were, which is a whole nother topic. We could talk about leadership during COVID. But I heard a saying, and this is where this really comes from. I heard a saying when I was in my yoga training, which was that authenticity in itself is the ultimate show of faith in oneself. And so I really take root with that over the years, I've sought to bring compassion and empathy to the workplace. Um, Sometimes that passion is probably perceived as too passionate or too emotional, because of course there's a bias there, right? For women who are passionate. Sometimes men can be passionate. Typically, women are too emotional. Sometimes too direct when I'm really just trying to be clear, because it is not rude to be direct. It is rude to keep someone in the dark. It's rude to, it's rude when my employees keep me in the dark. I've been told at times that, oh, so-and-so, they're afraid of you, which does make me sad, because it is necessary. It is necessary for leaders to sometimes express anger, displeasure, but I try to make sure my employees understand that that is because our actions or our lack of actions have impeded our progress. They may cause suffering or loss for in our world, our customers, which are residents of the city of South Bend. And the checkbook we're spending money out of is tax dollars. It is not our money. So, when something happens on a project and costs us more money, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we are accountable. And when I express this, again, I like to say I don't apologize for this. But at the same time, I'm going to be the first boss who will mama bear up, and I will, defend one of my team if they're being unjustly treated. So authenticity. Another principle would be health and wellness, a focus on health and wellness, which I'm sure doesn't shock anyone. Again, studies show that healthy diet, healthy lifestyle can reduce our incidence of chronic disease. And you can make those changes at any time in your life and slow down and avoid chronic illness or slow down aging. My team knows that I get up every day between 4 and 4:30 a.m. They also know that I go to bed at 9 p.m. So when they get strange emails from me, they usually come at 4:30 or 5 a.m. and then there's none at night. But I think that this consistent behavior models the importance of being healthy, taking care, putting your wellness first, and not just a healthy body, but a healthy mind. So I try to, that definitely is something I try to lead by example with. A growth mindset. I love learning. So I'm getting that's why I'm slowly, I'll be the longest student to get their MBA, but I'm always challenging myself to learn something new. I push myself to do things that are uncomfortable, like presentations. I have had a history of giving presentations over the years, pushing myself to do it. And I would typically have illness after a presentation. If I went to a large meeting, like a water meeting or an engineering meeting, there would be no doubt that I would be like flu-like the next day, because I will have stressed myself out so bad. This is even a little stranger to do a presentation about yourself. But like teaching was definitely pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And most recently, I was selected to be part of a organization, a nonprofit. It's a political civic leadership program where I get to sit amongst a group of diverse, intelligent, really impressive women who are doing amazing things in their communities. And it's really great when you get to be among women of great accomplishment and women that when you look around the room, you wonder why you're there. And then the last one would be truth, truthfulness, truth. And this core value of mine is something that I picked up in my yoga training. We were learning about the yamas and the niyamas, which are part of the Yoga Sutras. And so most of us are familiar with the physical practice of yoga, which is like the asana, but these are two other practices and they're kind of moral codes. And so, and truth Satya is about seeing the truth of reality in our life situations. So it's not about just, well, tell the truth. So maybe you've done a yoga class, and I'll put in a plug here. I was thinking about my friend Steve, who teaches artful yoga at this night. So if you've ever been, it's a free class. He is amazing. And but typically at the beginning of yoga class, you'll hear the teacher talk about an intention, setting intention for your practice. Well, when I was in my training, my teacher said, yeah, I've been setting the intention of truth for more than 7 years. And I thought, 7 years? It's still taking you 7 years to focus on telling the truth. But again, it's not just telling the truth. It's about, being completely honest with yourself. You have to slow down your mind sometimes. You have to slow down your thoughts so that you don't react instantaneously. And this is hard in leadership, to not react instantaneously. Slowing down allows your cerebral cortex to actually consider things before our emotional brain takes over. And this is a daily practice. And it's a daily practice to not identify with irrational thoughts, because so many things can happen and our thoughts can really get away from us. But emotions, situations, they come and go. And so if we can start to understand that, then maybe this is my yoga talk, life isn't as complicated as it may seem, right? But again, it's a practice, very much a practice. So.
Thanks, Kara. That gives me personally a lot to think about. Helpful to take that time to think and reflect. Before we break out into our small groups, one other question to ponder is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself at the start of your career?
Yeah, so a lot of those things that I try to value now, right? I wish I'd known earlier to bring my whole self to work. I wish I had not felt the need to hide parts of me. My group fitness instructing is one of those. For years, I didn't want people to know that I was teaching aerobics and I was going to work out all the time, because that seemed, contrary to the professional that I was trying to be. Don't wait for opportunities. Be specific in what you want. Think about what you can do to be seen as a leader. So if you're a young person and you want to be a leader, think about what you can do. Where does your boss need help? And take it off their plate. This is something that wins me over every time, when I'm not expecting something and it gets done for me. That is great on the part of one of my employees. Focus on progress over perfection. Probably heard that many times. I accepted this I didn't accept this a long time ago, like I should have. But I should have known this, because when I got my PhD, you learn how little you really know. And so it's constant, just progress. And again, I really blend my yoga training into this because it's a practice, right? It's bringing that each day. And so that leads me to, when you go home, leave your work behind if possible. Start over every day and try not to carry that burden. And that, again, a practice. And that's become something important, because I have to tell my employees constantly, you need to leave this at home, or you need to leave this behind, and it, don't take it home with you. There are going to be hard days. It's my last one. There'll be hard days. They're hard days. You're going to feel like a failure. But reframing seems to help. I've recently really started just stepping back when I feel like I'm struggling with something. And I ask myself, okay, what's the opposite of what I think I should do right here, right? If sometimes I might even, unfortunately, be projecting what I think needs to be done. So then I stop and I think, okay, well, what's the opposite of how I can approach this, and just reframe it from a different point of view.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording right here.